This video is brought to you by Surfshark. Stick around to hear more about the special offer they're providing to the entire upper echelon community. Okay, today I want to do something slightly out of character and talk about a whole bunch of things that I've been witnessing in the video game industry that make me extremely optimistic about the short-term future. That's a weird thing to say, especially from me, because with even just a cursory glance around the space, it probably seems like there's a multitude of things going wrong, and there are, that would be true. But today I want to make the case that sifting through the surface level problems, what we actually have is a proper foundation for the resurgence of fair-priced quality content, more so than I ever would have expected even just a couple of years ago. Let me carve through something right here at the onset, which is probably going to ruffle some feathers, I would say, a fair bit. There is a small and consistent group of creators who make a tremendous amount of money by stoking the fires of political discourse for their audiences. 15, 20, 30 separate videos about one specific game, really just kicking it into the dirt for views. I'm talking about terms like non-binary as in don't buy it, or a hyperfixation on consulting companies like Sweet Baby Incorporated. Terms like woke have become full-on phrases, get woke, go broke. And the funny thing about it is that I used to say all the very same things. Gaming has genuinely struggled under the weight of political activism. For anyone who doesn't know this, I was actually the target of a hit piece published on CNET back in 2019, which labeled me as an angry extremist because I recognized a series of rather objective problems and dared to speak about them. Primarily aggressive monetization, which was one of the main themes back then on the channel, political correctness infecting overall development constantly, and the rise of antagonistic journalism under the guise of inclusivity. At that time, like 6+ years ago, these things were an actual problem. And even now, depending on who you ask, they still are. Perhaps the worst problem that you could ever possibly think of. But truth be told, I don't find myself in agreement with that anymore, for a number of reasons. Still, as Nintendo and Microsoft normalize a price hike into the range of $80 per title, with major publishers like Ubisoft allegedly circling the drain, despite securing a pretty colossal partnership with Tencent now, and even me, myself, making a video in January of this very year titled "The AAA Gaming Bubble Has Popped," how is it that I can now talk about the brighter future of gaming with such optimism? This is how. It's complicated, so I'll go step by step, but the first thing that I want to focus on is media. Some people may disagree, which is fine, but my opinion is that a very large amount of the most pressing issues that the gaming industry has recently faced, at least in terms of product quality and especially narrative politics, were a direct result of major media outlets. For a very long time, gaming media websites like IGN, Kotaku, Polygon, GameSpot, PC Gamer, etc., occupied the role of gatekeepers in a way when it came to pretty much any interaction whatsoever between players, publishers, and developers. Take E3 as an obvious example. Once upon a time, E3 was like the pinnacle of the gaming news cycle. Once a year, an exclusive group of media figures would crowd into a series of closed-door showcases and then filter whatever information that they chose to, after demos and restricted previews, out to the general public. It wasn't until 2015 that they would even let normal players into the convention at all, and now just 8 years after that, it's canceled completely. E3 used to be a mechanism by which media publications would get enormous amounts of guaranteed traffic, but as the industry continued to grow, publishers and developers obviously realized that you can connect to fans of your product directly through social media and strategic advertising. Of course, major media publications continue to exist, and they probably always will, but over the span of even just 5 or 10 years, the type of influence that they hold is dramatically changing. Just to reiterate something that I said a couple of minutes ago, political activism infiltrating the world of gaming, with big air quotes here, journalism, was and continues to be a problem in the space. But I also think we need to maintain perspective on that. Take a look at this. Obviously, Google Trends is not a precise indicator of total reach or ultimate popularity, but I do think it can be used in a sort of generalized way, especially if there's a very clear shift. Check it out. These are the Google Trends pages for IGN, Kotaku, GameSpot, CNET, GamesRadar, and PC Gamer. What do we see here? I don't even really have to say it because obviously, but the graphs are extremely similar to each other, falling off of a cliff basically from 2010 through 2015. For some, it's a little bit different. Maybe they decline more sharply in 2018 or 2019, or even before that, 2008, 2009, etc. But the point I'm trying to make is that search term interest for these names is down like 80 to 95% or more. Over the past 15 to 20 years-ish, the internet became a conduit which everyone has access to, and social media became a dominant form of communication for publishing companies. Whether or not it causes them to die out completely, major gaming news publications have lost the majority of their previous influence. The same things which used to appear in a magazine or digital articles now crop up on a Twitter feed or a Twitch broadcast. Anyone with a smartphone, which is practically everyone, can access information about whatever upcoming game that they want to instantly without ever needing to read an article from Kotaku or IGN or whatever. And while, yes, there are still instances where publishing companies will give exclusive interviews or release exclusive footage, it does happen. It's not the rule, it's becoming the exception. I have long maintained a stance that political activism in the world of video game media is a problem, and it still is. But how bad is that problem really, when the voice of the person hell bent on using the medium for disgruntled social justice narratives is relegated to an insignificant corner? Obviously, it's still profitable to shadowbox these outlets, but with every single passing day, it becomes less and less productive. Just to be clear, when the hit piece got written about me, personally, I ended up gaining subscribers and Patreon supporters and social media followers on all sorts of different platforms. That was 6 years ago. And even more so now, as opposed to back then, getting canceled typically ends up giving you a boost in popularity. It is tremendously beneficial, financially and reputationally, for content creators to be perceived as the dramatic underdogs in a system that is rigged against them by the evil media giants. But the actual truth of the situation now is that we don't really live in that system anymore. It's been steadily declining for years, and we're kind of witnessing the whole thing sort of bottom out in real time right now. However, I don't want to focus on politics too much here because I don't think it's the most important issue. In fact, I'm not even sure it's in the top 3 or 5 at this point anymore. Here's a few things that matter far, far more than that, at least in my view. Stagnation of creativity, over reliance on existing franchises with little to no innovation. Overly aggressive monetization, although that's a little bit of a foregone conclusion at this point. I feel like we lost that battle, but season passes, microtransaction bundles that cost more than the game itself, etc., etc. Live services getting shut down, thereby rendering a purchase completely useless. That's a whole litigation battle that's happening in international court systems through different countries' political cycles and all that stuff. Or how about prices and development budgets skyrocketing at a time when most people have less money than they've ever had before? Any one of those things, in my opinion, would be wildly more important than the politics of the community manager for a failing game that none of us even wanted to play in the first place. Does that make sense? With that in mind, I want to shift gears now and talk about budget. Major AAA games now cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, market, and ship. I don't think it needs to be that way, not by any stretch of the imagination, but that's how things are. A high-profile game will cost 200 to 300 million. It gets loaded with microtransactions under the banner of a major publisher like Electronic Arts, or everyone's favorite villain now, I guess, Ubisoft, ultimately becoming a footnote in the quarterly earnings report as they move on to whatever's next, an endless, repeatable pipeline. They're spending more and more money to do this, but they need to earn more and more money as well, which is why we're locked in a cycle of mediocrity. Here's the thing. The brighter future of gaming has nothing to do with EA, Ubisoft, Take-Two Interactive, or even Microsoft. It has everything to do with names you've never even heard of. The internet is not really an amazing place lately. I'm talking, of course, about generative AI slop, misinformation, scammers, fraudsters, invasive data scraping, breaches, and all sorts of other problems. But one of the more common tools that I use myself to improve and protect my browsing experience is called Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN, virtual private network, and VPNs have a number of different uses, such as helping prevent certain types of phishing attacks, DNS tunneling, DDoS attacks in particular. They also mitigate data tracking/harvesting practices by all sorts of technology companies. If you care more about entertainment, which a lot of people do, Surfshark unlocks additional content on streaming websites, lots of them, by changing your geographic region, opening up additional options in your video library as a result of licensing deals. Surfshark also gets around regional censorship, websites being blocked in your region by the government, and it helps protect your IP address with encryption, modification, and various other additional services and features. I see comments about this from time to time, actually kind of a lot of them, so I make it a point to mention directly. But Surfshark does not keep logs, which is audit verified by Deloitte with a whole public report as well, which I have read. It's one of those bedrock policies that a VPN needs to have, in my view. Also, they maintain what's called a warrant canary, which doesn't matter to most people, but again, it's just good policy. If you click the link down below, surfshark.com/echelon, and use the code echelon at checkout, you'll get 4 extra months for free with a special pricing offer. Again, link down below, surfshark.com/echelon, coupon code echelon at checkout for an extra 4 months of the service for free. Big thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring the channel. There is a very simple reality that major publishers are about to contend with. Actually, some of them might already be contending with it actively. They just don't really have a ton of options for what to do. This reality is that a sizable chunk of the audience that they cater to simply does not have enough money to buy their products at a higher price point and dump increasingly large sums into their microtransaction stores, which is what they need to compensate for the spiraling rapidly development and marketing costs. I'll use the United States as an example because I live here, but it's also the largest consumer nation on earth right now, so it's probably a good place to start. It turns out, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, more American workers than ever before, and still rising, are working multiple jobs now. Actual consumer buying power hasn't changed in decades, and yet outstanding credit card debt over the past 25 years is at an all time high by a lot. One could be forgiven here for thinking that inflation and the growing scope of games that are being produced is somehow reason for higher pricing by publishers, but they would be wrong. Revenue in the video game industry is now 95% digital, with a tremendous amount of that coming after the initial purchase with all sorts of residuals. The shift from physical to digital distribution for products flatly eliminated something like 18% of distribution costs, which directly equates to an 18% increase in take home revenue for publishers. Even most of the top level players outright constructed their own proprietary storefronts, further increasing their profit margins on the very same products. And, it's not every single copy that they sell, but it's a decent chunk of them. And major publishers are now monetizing after the fact on what they call a per user basis, more so than ever before in history. Not only are they raising prices, normalized by the likes of Nintendo and Microsoft now, but if you dig through the quarterly revenue report for Microsoft post merger with Activision Blizzard, down on page 33, it says, quote, Xbox content and services revenue increased 62%, driven by 61 points of net impact from the Activision Blizzard acquisition. The net impact reflects the change of Activision Blizzard content from third party to first party, end quote. Pretty much across the board, revenue and commercial growth was up, and yet Microsoft led the industry by laying off thousands of workers. Even before the acquisition, Activision Blizzard was doing the very same thing. In 2018, for example, net bookings were 7.26 billion, which was referred to as the best in our history by Robert Kotick, and yet shortly afterwards, Activision Blizzard was laying off 8% of its entire workforce. Across the entire industry, tens of thousands of people are being let go as of 2024, despite record profits and revenue, on top of spiraling development costs. But the real reason for that is because none of it will ever be enough for them. These are publicly traded companies. They must increase the revenue every quarter of every year, because if they don't, executives can lose their jobs. It's a reductive way of thinking about things, but the idea that gamers lost control of the hobby, the notion that the people in charge don't care about the medium and simply don't understand it properly, it's effectively true at the AAA level. And yet, here I am claiming that the future is bright. Let's talk about that. I want to use a couple of key examples because not only are they fresh in everyone's mind, or at least they should be, but they're also indicative of what I think is likely to be a new renaissance of AA creativity. First, I should think obviously at this point, hence the background footage I've been using, is Expedition 33. Expedition 33 is a phenomenal game, but that's not why I'm making this. I could do a review and likely will at some point, but the meteoric success of the title after giving players an unbelievably well-crafted experience in totality goes a hell of a lot deeper than just, it's a really cool game. Of course, that's true. It is, blending turn-based mechanics with incredible graphics and a wonderfully compelling story, competing in every sense of the word with a AAA product, any AAA product that you can imagine. But it was also a $50 game, instead of being more expensive than the previous $60 norm. It was less. And that may seem like a small detail, but it's really not. More and more people can't really afford to buy every single or even some of the new releases. Not only that, but when the price hike is soon normalized, which it will be, they'll get even more picky with what they choose, thereby negatively impacting top-level publishers, but opening the door, substantially, for $30, $40, and $50 AA titles to steal the entire spotlight, which they are. However, going even further on the business side of things, there's better news. Expedition 33 is developed by Sandfall Interactive, a famous name now, which was founded only recently in 2020. It's a small studio, a recent small studio, producing competitive top-level video games, but it's published by a company called Kepler Interactive. This is big in my view, because while the game certainly benefits and did tremendously benefit from a program like Game Pass, it's not under Microsoft's thumb. Kepler Interactive is a rather unique publisher as well. From their About page, quote, "We are a global publisher and game developer built on a unique co-ownership model. Kepler gives studios a stake in the business and a leadership role in strategic decision making, at the same time as preserving their creative independence, enabling them to make fun and commercially successful games appealing to a wide audience." End quote. Hopefully, I'm not the only one truly excited by that, but a co ownership model, which gives developers a literal stake in the business, is exactly what people have been asking for since like 2014. The number one complaint is that the controlling decision makers at a publisher level aren't actually gamers or creatives. I'm sure we've heard the line of critique before from all over the place, but Kepler Interactive, they are, and so far the results are speaking for themselves. This is what we've been asking for. Expedition 33 has an incredible story of unknown, first time, and creatively supported people, developers really, just doing what they love, with the proper backing, the proper kind of backing. And now we have a game that very easily competes with any AAA product that you ever want to mention for a fraction of the cost from a very small relative size development team with a shorter development cycle. And the ultimate cherry on top is that the ending product costs less for the actual players, with none of the industry standard greedy practices bottled up inside it. If ever there would be a shining example of what's possible, this is it. To be clear, Kepler is also far from the only upstart publisher that's making waves in the industry. Another of my go-to examples that I've talked about before would be Hooded Horse, who is now responsible for multiple high-quality game releases and upcoming projects, some of which would be Manor Lords, Cataclysmo, and Falling Frontier, a game I've followed since the very beginning of its cycle. Hooded Horse genuinely supports their partners, and I say this after a multitude of conversations with developers and leadership, giving me an entirely new perspective on the world of indie games. If that's not enough, how about this? Bungie, underneath Sony, is probably one of the most high-profile game development companies out there. They're responsible for numerous AAA quality experiences, most recently working on a game called Marathon, which is a stylized extraction shooter. Well, right around the same time that Bungie was making headlines by opening up their game to the public, really, a competing product called Arc Raiders was doing the very same thing. But Arc Raiders appears to be on track for a $40 ending price tag, not 60 or 70 or 80. This would make Arc Raiders half the cost of the new AAA standard that they're trying to push. And yet, I don't think I saw a single person disagreeing that the game is monumentally superior when compared to Marathon, even when it comes to basic features, despite Marathon being made with the backing of Sony. Interestingly, Arc Raiders is being both developed and published by Embark, which is now a subsidiary of Nexon, but with a standard buy-to-play model and a price tag of what looks to be right around $40 in the end. This would be yet another example of a smaller budget, relatively nimble development team, which isn't just competing with the current AAA norm, it's outright surpassing it. Games with smaller budgets, smaller dev teams, but more creative freedom, supported by a new wave of publishers like Kepler Interactive or Hooded Horse, which have a business model appearing to solve the number one criticism that gamers have long held for the past decade, are now occupying a main stage spotlight. As AAA pricing continues to rise without fail, with certain commentators continuing to complain about the woke politics in the likes of Concord, Dragon Age, or Assassin's Creed, I find myself more optimistic than I have been in many years as I witness products like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Expedition 33, and Arc Raiders not just succeed, but set examples. It's easy enough to focus on the failures. It's actually far more profitable and you get a lot more viewership, and I've done it too, all too often. Suicide Squad, Skull and Bones, Concord, etc. But the safety net here is that when companies fail to produce what people want while excessively over-monetizing for this much time, an opportunity is created for something better, which is precisely what I think we are now seeing with a AA gaming resurgence that not only competes with, but strategically outperforms the AAA industry at large in terms of raw value and creativity. Honestly, I could be wrong, but it feels like the player base literally cannot afford to keep inflating the bottom line profit metrics for a handful of dominant publishers. I've been talking about the predatory, unsustainable trends for like almost a decade now, but at a certain point, if that criticism is in fact true, something has to break, right? If I keep saying it's unsustainable at a certain point, it will no longer be sustained, right? I can't just keep saying that forever. The world of AAA gaming as an industry is a bloated, overly commercialized monstrosity, which is now completely out of touch with what the people really want, necessitating collapse, which is happening. Obviously, certain titles will rise above the general trend. Something like GTA 6 will probably cost $100, sell 20 million copies, and break all the records. But the appetite for slightly smaller, creatively governed products is only ever growing. And my prediction is that 2025 and 2026 and beyond that will see a fantastic explosion of AA creativity with, I don't know, under budget, smaller budget, yet extremely successful products from developers and publishers that nobody had ever previously even heard of. And I really hope I'm right. That's it. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below, a special VPN deal, locals and Patreon, obviously articles on our website, etc., but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, question everything, and have a nice night.